As a young kid, I was always super optimistic. I always found the good in people, and my mom would sometimes get annoyed. When we went to stores, I would always run up to strangers and ask, "How was your day?" Or "How can I help you?" My mom would come behind me, take my hand, and apologize for me disturbing them. She told me that I can't always trust people. I wish I had believed her. I was 8 years old when one night I woke up. I wasn't scared of the dark, but I wouldn't lie if I said a random thud didn't startle me. I flipped the light switch right next to my bed, revealing a woman in my room. It scared me, and as I had no idea who she was, I almost began to scream if she didn't cover my mouth. She put a finger over her mouth. Despite being afraid, I looked at her. She couldn't have been older than 16 and was really pretty. She removed her hand from my mouth, and I couldn't help but feel she was a friend. I mean, if she wanted to hurt me, she could have. I asked, "Who are you?" She quietly answers, "My name is Hannah." We talked for a little, and she asked how old I was, where I went to school, and about my mom. After a while, I wondered if I could show her my Lego set, to which she smiled and said of course. She even offered me some of her Pepsi, which tasted a little funny, but it was still excellent. I started to really like her and enjoyed her company. After a while, she looked at her watch and stared at it. As she did, a tear fell down her face. I asked her, "Hannah, are you okay?" She wiped her tear and said no. I felt terrible for her. She then asked if I wanted ice cream, which I am always down for ice cream. She took my hand and led me to what I thought would be my kitchen. Instead, she walked me to my front door, and before she opened the door, she asked me something weird. "Why didn't you freak out when I appeared in your room?" Even at a young age, I understood that to be a weird question. I thought and said, "I just trust you." Another tear came down her face, and then she said something I couldn't forget. She said, "I can't do this anymore." She locked the door, which I realized wasn't locked, and she took me to the kitchen, where she grabbed a knife. I didn't know what was happening. She then took me to my mom's room, where she told me to go and tell her that a man outside was trying to break in and call the cops. I didn't understand what she was asking, but she looked into my eyes. "You're a brave kid. I need you to be a little braver." She kissed me on the cheek, which made me blush. I trusted her and went into my mom's room. I tugged on her, and she woke up. She looked at me and said, "Hey, sweetheart, did you have a bad dream?" I looked at her severely. "Mom, there is a man outside, and I think he wants to hurt Hannah. You need to call the police." What I said startled her, and she got out of bed. "Honey, I think you had a bad nightmare." I looked at her more seriously and began explaining Hannah being in my room and how she told me to come in here to ask you to call the police. The look on her face filled with fear when I told her that Hannah had locked the door. My mom ran to her door and locked it, turning on the light. The light blinded me for a second, and when I opened my eyes, my mom had her gun out and was on her phone. She sat on the bed, and that's when the sound of someone banging on the front door started. I jumped into bed and saw on my mom's phone that she was looking at the camera at the front door. I began to become really scared. "Mom, what is happening?" She said, "Stay here," gave me her phone, and told me 911. "When I leave this room, lock the door and do not unlock it for anyone but me." She then looked at me so intensely that it scared me and asked, "Did you understand?" I nodded my head. She then unlocked her door and left when I shut and locked it. I began calling 911 and gave them started to provide my address when the banging increased. As I gave as much information to the dispatcher, I began to hear screaming. Then the front door sounded as it was knocked off its hinge, and more screams followed by a gunshot emerged. I tried hard to stay on the line, but I started to feel tired and weak, and as I closed my eyes, everything faded. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I looked for my mom, but she wasn't there. Instead, there was a police officer. He noticed I was awake and began calming me down. He asked me to tell him what I remembered, and I started explaining everything I could. After I did, he thanked me for my time and left, and right after, my mom entered. She kissed me on my forehead. I asked her what happened, and she said she would explain more as I got older, but for now, she explained a bad man was trying to hurt my friend Hannah, and she stopped him. I learned that I passed out for 3 days. Even weirder, after I got out of the hospital, I learned that Hannah would come live with us for the time being. It was nice having her around. She became an older sister to me and helped my mom out. I could tell Hannah had a hard time as she had more nightmares than I did and had to see many doctors. After a year, I finally asked my mom what had happened that night, and she refused to tell me. So, I went to Hannah. What she said scared me and made me feel happy that she was my friend that night. She said my mom shot at him when the evil man entered the house but missed and stabbed her. When he started to head to the room I was in, Hannah attacked him and stopped him. She then helped my mom when the police arrived on the scene. When she looked down, I asked why I fell asleep and said I spiked your drink and was initially helping the man kidnapping you. Second story, I think I'm too accommodating. Ever since I was young, I've never been one to push back. It's not that I don't care or don't want things, I just prefer that everyone be happy, that everyone gets along. I don't like feeling that I could have done something to help and failed. I was so obedient as a child. My parents and teachers all loved to point me out to the other children as an example. That had its own repercussions. I don't like to talk about them, but it made me feel good to know I was doing what I was supposed to do. When I got older, things got more complicated. There were so many people who wanted things from me, conflicting things, sometimes different things from the same person. Not just teachers, but also friends and classmates, and then bosses and coworkers, and even lovers. For some reason, I always struggled with relationships. Sometimes I'd read advice that you should set boundaries, that you should stake out your space and stand up for yourself, but I just don't see how that can work. If you love someone, you want them to be happy, don't you? And if you don't have what they want, you should try to get it for them, right? I always changed so many things for my boyfriends. My hair, my clothes, my accent, my eyes, my teeth, my skin. I changed everything to make them happier, but they never were. It was never enough. I was never enough. And I worried about them, about me, about what could possibly be wrong. They never stayed. Until the last one. He stayed so much longer than the others, and what he wanted from me was so little, considering I barely had to change at all. In fact, I almost never had to do anything. He liked it when I was silent. I learned that one fast. He liked me to be ready for him. He liked me to be waiting. He liked the quiet. He wasn't very quiet himself. He was a doer, a real go-getter. He loved to do things, and I always thought he liked to do them to me especially. He was gone a lot, on long trips. I assumed it was for work. He didn't like it if I asked questions. Then came the day when he took me on a trip. I went along, of course, even though I had a lot of work to do around the house. We drove for hours, all the way up the mountain. Then he wanted me to come on a hike, and even though I hadn't brought proper shoes or a coat, I went just to make him happy. After a long time, after my feet were all blisters and cuts and my hair was a ragged mess that would take me hours to fix back the way he normally liked it, he finally told me to stop, that we'd arrived. I waited patiently for him to tell me what else he wanted, but he didn't say. I think I know, though. He cut my throat and laid me down on the ground. It's clear he wanted me to stay here. I bled very obligingly, and when he started to look worried, I made sure to be very dead. He checked my wrist, and I knew he'd be upset if I still had a pulse, but luckily he smiled and stood up. He cleaned his hands and his knife, and then he walked away. He didn't call me to follow after, so I stayed. That's what he wanted, I'm sure. My only hope for my lovers is that they are happy, that they are pleased with me, that I can give them what they want. It's peaceful here, in the forest, on the mountain. There are rains and fogs, and sometimes I hear animals pass by. They don't come too near me, and if they did, they'd just want to leave again, so it's easy to help them. Animals are simple, with simple needs and wants. Animals are easy. People are complicated. So it was a nice break for a while. But now it's been a long time, a dreadfully long time. I don't want to make a fuss. I don't want it to be all about me and my feelings. But how can I know what he wants if he isn't here to tell me? He hasn't come back, and I'm getting so fearful that he might want something else from me. What if he's unhappy? If he won't tell me what he wants, how can I satisfy him? Should I go find him? Should I make sure that this is truly what he wanted? Perhaps he misses me. Perhaps he also would like the dark and the cold and the peace of the rain and the pine trees. Perhaps I'll go looking for him and bring him back, just so he can see for himself how good I've been. Don't you think that's what he'd want?